Hello, everyone. Welcome to Hardfire Media Liberal Conversations, a series of screen media programs we are doing to discuss current events and to help us through this unique time of unprecedented state exercise of power in certain places. The idea for this series comes from classical liberalism, which is based on free speech, freedom of religion, and equal rights under law. And we should also say a robust civil society. These discussions are available on our Hardfire YouTube channel, where we have been producing content in downtown Brooklyn over the last 7 years. But for the last year, the studio has been locked down and still locked down. So during the national emergency, we're holding these liberal conversations. But then they'll also be appearing on, we've had about 15 of these conversations since the national emergency, right? Never let a good crisis go to waste. The state declares a national emergency, which gives them unchecked powers, could be. I look forward to this conversation. This will be our April and May 2021 shows on Brooklyn Free Speech Cable, which is shown citywide about 15 times per month. We do a new show every month. We should note that we are more than a year into lockdown, which was supposed to last 3 weeks while we get herd immunity. The state never lets a good crisis go to waste. Today, we're going to discuss big media and censorship. This is obviously a current topic and relates to ongoing theme in our conversations about the growing corporatism in America, where big businesses embed with the state. This may have been true before the national emergency, but it is certainly more true today with discretionary power the state has seized, declaring certain classes of people essential and most everyone else not so. Okay, that's the introduction. Now I would like each interlocutor to identify yourselves, say hello to our viewers, and say why you are interested in talking about big media and censorship. Why don't we start in the order that people have appeared longest on our Hardfire media stuff. So this is kind of a meta show, right? We're a media enterprise talking about media. So it's a little bit of a meta enterprise. So Derek, why don't you introduce yourself and say hello?
Oh, sure. Okay. I'm Derek. I'm a former teacher. I'm a handyman entrepreneur with a long history of libertarian activism and sympathies. My interest in this topic is from a libertarian perspective and just about clearing the confusion and the misperceptions about censorship and what censorship really means and what it looks like in the free market.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what the exploratory question is. What is censorship? Exactly. And so next longest would be Francisco Aldape. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Cameron, and everybody. Look forward to our conversation today. My name is Francisco Aldape. I am teaching economics in the last couple of semesters, and I'm interested in this topic because I believe that media has like a very important influence on the not only on shaping people's mentality, but on the overall economy. So I'm excited for this topic and look forward to hearing more about it from everybody's points of view. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. What I like to do on this program is to put together something that I haven't been able to quite figure out myself, and then invite other people, and then we talk it out, and then I learn more about it. And somebody we know in common, Francisco, Deirdre McCloskey, she describes how the economy is 60% rhetoric, right? So journalism, media, information is for, on one measurement, 60% of the economy. Information, I guess you can say. All right, then next would be Greg Smith. Welcome to the show, Greg.
Hi. Thanks, Cameron. Yeah, keen to join again. As I said before, my background is in business management in telecommunications in Australia and overseas, internationally as well. These days, my interest is in all things technology, media, and there's been a lot of interesting things happening in Australia with the media as well, and that impacts all sorts of things. So very keen to sort of share those ideas and get some ideas from you guys as well. So thanks for inviting me.
You're welcome. Exactly. You've got two Australians, Greg and Glenn. Glenn, who's up next, has been a journalist in Australia for 40 years. So we're going to get a journalism perspective on this as well. And our first discussion will be on the Australian case, which is interesting because, we'll get to that because of the Murdoch News Corps. It's such a large worldwide, what do they call it? Legacy media or corporate media, who was so instrumental in the Facebook case in Australia, and the Murdoch family is from Australia, which then brings us to our next guest, Glenn Simmons. If you could welcome to the show and introduce yourself and tell us why you're interested.
Yeah, g'day, Cameron. Thank you for having me on the show. Yeah, as you said, I've been a journalist in Australia since the late 70s, recently retired. Spent probably the best part of 30 years working for the Murdoch media. I've also worked in magazines and on radio, predominantly in major metropolitan daily newspapers up and down the east coast of the country. So hopefully I'll be able to bring a few insights from the other side of the fence, which will hopefully bring your viewers, give them a rough idea of what it's like actually working or being in the midst of the media.
Exactly. And there's the United States, they call it our famous First Amendment, right? The freedom to speech. Does Australia have an equivalent of that? First Amendment, freedom of speech?
Not necessarily, but in a way we sort of operate on the honesty system out here, though something that we will possibly get into later is each country has its own rules and regulations regarding what can and can't be printed. And they also differ from different forms of media. So we do have structures in place which govern what we can and cannot say.
Right.
Plus from, a public, from a citizen's point of view, we don't have the same constitutional structure as you guys, but all of those same elements are embedded in our constitution. I'm not an expert on it, but freedom of speech and discrimination and all that sort of stuff. Glenn, you're probably more familiar with that, having to keep that in mind with all the stuff you've done in your career. But we don't have the amendments as specifically as that. It's sort of all within our constitution, I guess, isn't it?
Well, it is in a way, but also as far as the industry is concerned, we are governed by what they call a code of ethics. Now, over the years, that's been quite heavily adhered to. And there are also councils where if people wish to complain, you can go to the press council. We have that here, and it becomes an adjudicator, and that's where the rights and the wrongs of it are decided. So should you choose to step outside of our code of ethics, well, then there can be repercussions through official channels as well.
And that what do you call the official panel that you adjudicate?
The press council.
The press council. And who makes up the press council? That's political appointees or?
They're generally highly experienced and high-level people from different media organisations. So it'll be like your judges in your very important courts over there. They're made up by highly experienced and highly powered people. Well, it's the same here, except that they come from the press. So there'd be different ones from Murdoch, from all of the major corporations. And so you get a good breadth of opinion on that and a lot of experience.
Yeah.
So it's a self-regulation thing rather than a court or a constitutional thing, Glenn, by the sounds.
Oh, most definitely. But of course, if people think they've been hard done by that, then there are avenues where they can take legal repercussions as well.
Through the court system, yes.
That's right. That's right. It can be separate.
It's like the Hollywood Code in the 1930s when they self-censored themselves. Self-regulation, as Greg calls it, right? So thank you for participating in the discussion. We have seen that certain people and platforms have been banned from big media. I would like, just as a cursory opening, does this banning represent censorship, quote unquote? So, for example, the previous president of the United States was dropped from some social media thing, and certain investigative journalism is dropped. So when corporations, say for political reasons or virtue signaling reasons, drop people from their platforms, is that censorship? So let me read from Wiki what censorship is, and then I can show it on the screen at the same time when I edit. Censorship is the suppression of speech, public communication, or other information on the basis that such material is considered objectionable, harmful, sensitive, or inconvenient. Censorship can be conducted by governments, private institutions, and other controlling bodies. So I guess my drawing line would be if the state censors or prohibits information, then that's censorship. But if a private company does it, well, that's private enterprise. Do people agree with me or no? Do we have censorship in the U.S. with certain?
The same word applies, but one is less objectionable than the other.
What's the other word?
I would say you can call it censorship just the same, but one version is less objectionable than the other.
Right. One's private and one is coerced with the power of the state behind you. Yeah. So it's just a question of how we're defining what censorship is.
And what censorship is acceptable and which censorship we don't find acceptable.
Exactly. So I personally, my personal view is from Voltaire, who said, I may disagree with what you have to say, but I'll defend with my life your right to say it. And then following that is the only way to suss out the truth with bad, if people are pushing bad information, the only way to seek more truth is with more information. So yeah, that's my take on that. So as long as you don't, private firms can cancel, but as long as other private firms are able to take up the slack, well, then we don't have a problem.
Yeah, well, where you have the problem is where you get a concentration of media where, and that's, there's been accusations of that in Australia, Glenn, to some degree, that if your former organisation wasn't on side, you really didn't have a voice. So the political parties fell over themselves backwards to have that influence and that control. Otherwise, their message wouldn't get through or wouldn't get through and be presented in a positive light.
Yeah, it can be. It's a very interesting thing that the power comes with, as Murdoch has found over the years, with controlling the major newspapers in all of the major cities, gives you the ability to sway people's opinion. And if you can sway the opinion of the public, well, then politicians have no choice but to try and have you in their camp. Because if they decide to go against you, as we've seen many, many times in the past, you can be absolutely slaughtered in the press. So you have to try and strike that balance. That's why you need a viable, combative media where you have all different, coming from different sides and giving different opinions and upholding different ideologies, because that way people can make an informed decision. If you just have a concentration of one particular camp in any particular city, well, then there's no voice against it. And that's when your troubles begin. And then the politicians, as they generally do, go with their tails between their legs and hand out hoping for some, a benefactor which will get them elected again.
So do you think in Australia, and probably it applies elsewhere, that the political parties are applying censorship through the press when they have control, or are they completely at the mercy of the press and the press are doing the censorship and they're either in the good books or the bad books? And if they're in the bad books, well, probably they'll get voted out because public opinion will go against them eventually.
Well, it will. I mean, the press do hold an awful lot of power. In Australia here, Murdoch has the main paper in just about every major capital city. And the trouble is that there's been such little opposition of recent times. We used to have other big publishing companies like Fairfax and things like that, which would always take the battle to the Murdoch Corporation. But for whatever reason, they've now becomes much smaller corporations, and while Murdoch has maintained his monopoly, and so therefore the opposition is not there. It is there, but it's not there in the strength that it used to be. So he still holds the power. There's no doubt about that. And as I said before, if he decides that he's going to go against you when you're running for government and he doesn't like you, then there's every possibility that you are going to get slaughtered in the press, and the public will read that because it is the major form of press here. So again.
The media holds a lot of power. Yes, we definitely agree there. And well, I look at it from a public choice perspective. The media, mainstream media, has to follow what the state says. Otherwise, they won't get invited to the press conferences. Otherwise, they won't have access to the parole of the state. So, in order to get access to the state, you need to support the state's message. Am I wrong?
I'm not sure if we have that balance in Australia. I mean, maybe the balance is the other way around, that the government is more, on its knees, begging for fair treatment from the press. You know what I mean? The balance is possibly the opposite way. That's an uneducated opinion. Glenn, you might want to comment.
Oh, well, the thing is, we've seen it plenty of times. I've seen it plenty of times in my career where government has decided to take a hard line against certain journalists because a journalist may be reporting on a way that the government doesn't particularly like. So they'll ban them from news conferences or press conferences. But what happens is that in this country, journalists, we've got a pretty thick hide we have out here. So we have other ways of finding out the information that we need. So when governments turn around and ban us, we will then go and find that information through another avenue. So it does not stop how we wish to portray a story, or if we're looking for the facts, which is what we should be doing, and presenting them in an unbiased fashion. If we chase those, we'll chase those facts. It'll be like a Rottweiler on your tail. And so, and we're ferocious in how we will chase down those facts. And if you decide to ban us, we'll be coming for you. I mean, no doubt about that.
Let me ask, so now we're talking about what is a journalist. What is a journalist? I mean, why isn't a blogger or someone who does podcasts, or even myself who has a blog, and why wouldn't I be a journalist? In other words, what makes a journalist versus a writer or a pundit or something like that? What is a journalist? And
You're right. Yeah, a journalist is somebody who gathers and produces news and presents it to the public in an unbiased fashion. So, and it is a craft. It is, and generally a journalist is paid to do that. So it is a profession. So it'd be like saying, I don't know if you could call a blogger a journalist, because it is a blogger's main concern, chasing down, facts and presenting it unbiasedly. So
maybe what you're saying is a journalist is someone who has an editor. There's some type of checks and balances in there.
Oh, absolutely. You have to have the checks and balances in there. That's why, anyway, people who write things on Twitter and things like that, they're not journalists. Not at all. They're people who have an opinion. A journalist is somebody who's paid to present the facts in an unbiased fashion. And yes, we have editors and we're paid to do it. So it is a profession and it is actually a craft.
Do you take a vow to follow a code of ethics when you become a journalist?
Oh, you have to follow the code. Many years ago, you virtually had to be a member of the Journalists Union. Right.
That's what that my next question. You have to, if you're a member of the union, then you're a journalist. If you're not a member of the union, you're not a journalist.
Well, that was the case in the old days when we were very heavily union regulated, or the unions were very powerful here. It sort of dropped off in the last couple of decades. But at the same time, if you wish to have any credibility and make your name as a journalist, you really want to be working for one of the major news corporations.
Right. But aren't many, well, at least in the New York Times, and I don't know if you've been following the stories, but a lot of big name journalists, and you're right, reputation in the craft industry, a lot of people under this new cancel culture and virtue signaling, a lot of big name journalists are being removed from the papers for not being sufficiently left or politically correct, and then are going on to other platforms that are self-funded platforms. So it really is just a shake-up time in journalism, right? Because of the internet and the fat tails of the internet and the decentralized way of expressing information. But you still need, like the New York Times used to be the paper of record. right? It exists because it's captured in the New York Times. So there is a tension going on right now as to what exactly is journalism, I think.
Yeah, well, we're sort of finding that here a little bit that I suppose we're suffering here a little bit like everywhere else in the world. What I like to term the offenderati are actually the loudest voice of all. And even when it's like you can have an opinion as long as it agrees with mine. And if you disagree with them, then they will find some way to try and tear you down. Social media is dreadful for this at the moment. But again, it's a lot of people can't accept that there has to be a balance in the story. There's two sides to every story. And if you only support one side, then somebody who supports the other side is going to offend you. And this is the shift in power that we're seeing at the moment, that very loud people who have been offended by something that somebody says, even if it is wholly backed by fact and there is nothing wrong with it, they just take offense. And the next thing you know, there's a hullabaloo. And where do we go from there? You know, it all gets that's when it all starts getting very contrived and very confusing. And this is a difficulty that mainstream media is having at the moment. They have to try and maintain their credibility, but in order to maintain their credibility, they have to tell both sides of the story.
Yeah.
Are the consumers of news to some extent to blame, in the sense that the consumers of news are often looking for news that is slanted towards what they already believe. So they're not looking for unbiased facts. They're looking for facts that bolster their pre-existing beliefs. And we're consuming by choice certain news, we're not looking for the full range of facts.
I want to follow up with Derek about full range there. And Glenn, you said that journalists write without bias, but isn't everybody innately biased in the fact that every means of communication or mode of communication is a quest for persuasion, right? Glenn, can you honestly say that you were unbiased towards an issue and that you sussed out or were you aware of your bias and then therefore try to bring up counter issues to a point, or what?
I wouldn't call it bias, Cameron. I'm human. I have an opinion, but I can't let my opinion sway my judgment as far as when I'm reporting a story is concerned. My whole goal in reporting a story is to report the truth and support that truth with fact. And that fact then allows the public to make up their own decision on it. If they decide that it's not true, then that's not my problem. My problem is to present it as factually correct as possible. If I have an opinion and I want to write something about it to express my opinion, I will so, but it will be under the subhead of opinion or comment. Exactly. And so that, I think, is also an area that is now starting to get a little bit swayed. People express their opinion in a story where they should actually just be reporting the facts and the facts only. And that's where other media are suffering. And that's where your credibility suffers as well. I mean, as a hard-nosed journalist, you should be doing your job. Simple as that. If you want to write an opinion piece, write an opinion piece and tell people how you actually feel.
Don't disguise it.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's where the trouble starts, I think.
But back to Derek's point, in the end, doesn't the customer decide, as long as you have free entry and exit? If one outlet is not giving you what you believe the truth, can't you go to another outlet? And isn't that what keeps the truth open? Is the ability to have competing voices?
Well, exactly. And that's why it's always important to have an opposition. The same as government. You can't have a government rule without an opposition. And you can't have a major metropolitan news corporation operating in a city without another major metropolitan news corporation in opposition. You'll generally find one leads to the right, one leads to the left. And therefore, and the public can make up their opinion. If they don't like what Murdoch prints, they can go and buy a Fairfax paper, or they can go and listen to the ABC, because one will be, they're ideologically combative. So a lot of it just depends on a person's makeup, whether they lean to the left or lean to the right, whichever way they feel, naturally they'll lean towards that news organisation. But if they want a clear picture, they should listen to what both are saying.
Exactly. Yeah, that's good advice. So
I think what the issue for many folks is, in many cities, as you've implied, in many markets, there is only one alternative, or the way that Facebook is the major source of news for a lot of people. And when people don't have alternatives, I guess the question is, whose role is it to try and create alternatives for those people where one does not exist? Is it the government's role? Is it the market's role? Should someone step in, or is that just the way it is? That in some places there simply is not a wide range of alternative.
That's a good point to end our first show on this, big media and censorship. Derek's point again, who decides what is the truth? Why don't we pick up there? So thank you everyone for watching Hardfire Media Liberal Conversations. This has been the first part of our big media and censorship series. Thank you. We'll see you next time on Hardfire. For the greater community. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's so essential service